Love does not rejoice about injustice. That word injustice literally means unrighteousness or sin. So love does not rejoice about sin, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Now, if you don't know, the New Testament portion of the Bible was originally written in the Greek language, and Greek does not translate into English perfectly, and so in our English language, we have a number of different what's called translations of the Bible. We're using the New Living Translation here. Other translations in the English say this: love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Now, as I was studying the meaning of this verse, there is an element here that we can't ignore, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on. There's an element here of the fact that as Christians, we should not rejoice when evil things befall someone in our life that might be our enemy or we don't like. So I'm not pointing anybody out because I'm as guilty as anybody in my life of doing this before. But have you ever just felt about someone, like something bad happens to someone that you don't like or call them your enemy or whatever, and you say out loud or you think, well, they're just getting what they deserve? Ever say that? Or something bad happens to somebody you don't like, or again, somebody who might be your enemy, and sarcastically you say, sarcasm is a spiritual gift of mine, so sarcastically you say something like, well, it couldn't have happened to a better person. Ever say that before? There's a hint of that here, by the way, that love does not rejoice when evil befalls on someone you don't like. But we've talked enough about that in the series. We've already talked about how Jesus expects those of us who follow him to love our enemies, to pray for and bless those who persecute us. So this obviously makes sense that would include that meaning, but it's more than that. Albert Barnes, the theologian, in his commentary said this about that verse: love grieves when anyone has done anything wrong. It neither loves the wrong nor the fact that it has been done. Love grieves sin. So the first response we need to have towards sin is this. Number one, love grieves over all sin. Love grieves over all sin. Let me ask you a question. When's the last time you grieved over sin? I'm not talking about just feeling bad. I'm talking about when's the last time you were broken for your own sin and the sins of others. I've been so challenged this week by this church. I kind of feel that God has swung the doors open on the back of the minivan, like from my illustration earlier. Only this time, he's not revealing a gift. He's revealing to us the depth of sin in this world, and we're kind of like, oh, okay, just moving on. Sin is sin. Everyone sins. No one's perfect. Sin is sin is sin. The whole world's just full of sin. Okay. But no. Sin is not something we just put up with in life. Sin is something God wants to put away from this life. That sin cannot be something we gloss over as if it's no big deal. Sin must be something we grieve over in this life. Do we forget? I think sometimes we kind of do. I do anyway. Do we forget it was our own sin that nailed Jesus to the cross? Not just sin in general or someone else's sin, but my sin killed Jesus. There's weight to that, church, that should cause us to grieve over our sin. That all the sins I ever committed and any sin I will commit in the future, all of it, sin is so great an offense against God. The only remedy he had was what we sang about earlier in the song Heaven and Earth. Salvation came for us, nailed to a tree. The Father lost his Son so we could be free. the sins of all the world, a ransom's death. It was finished as he took his final breath. It took the sinless, perfect blood of God himself in the flesh to get rid of and pay the price for our sin. 2 Corinthians 5:21 words it this way: for God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God through Christ. And yet we just gloss over it as if it's no big deal. Everyone sins. What's the big deal? Friends, when we are filled with the love of God, we can't help but grieve over our sin. Especially when we see our God hanging on a cross to pay the price for it. Until we grieve over the depth and weight of sin, we will never be able to fully rejoice at the glory and majesty of our salvation. That was good enough to repeat, so I will. Until we grieve over the depth and weight of our sin, we will never be able to fully rejoice at the glory and majesty of our salvation. Salvation won't be great enough until we know our sin is great against God. I read dozens of quotes about this idea of grieving over sin from theologians and pastors. Here's 4 that rose to the top for me. The quickest way to lose the wonder of the gospel is to lose sight of the depth of our sin. Jared Mulvihill, pastor and blogger. John Owen, another pastor, says, I do not understand how a person can be a true believer and sin not be the greatest burden, sorrow, and trouble in their life. Jonathan Edwards, famous theologian, long gone now, said, the more a true saint loves God, the more he mourns for sin. A.W. Pink, pastor, theologian, and poet. It is not the absence of sin, but the grieving over it, which distinguishes the child of God from empty professors of faith. I have to wonder, church, if there is no grieving over sin in my heart, how much of God has been pushed out of my heart because of sin? Because when God is present in my heart and there is any remnant of sin, I grieve over that sin. The response we have to sin in this life reveals the depth of love we have. So how should we respond to sin? Church, I think there is a healthy sense of grieving we need to have over sin. And to be honest, I think we've lost a lot of that in the church today.